Hello, this is Paul with Reloading123. Thank you for stopping back in. We are really getting into the meat and potatoes of things. It is going to get really exciting from here on. So what you're after here in this installment is you are going to find out how to bell the case mouth. You're also going to learn how to set up the powder scale and powder measure. And if we get far enough, we're going to charge some cases and hopefully have time to seat some bullets. So let's get at it. Now we're looking at the final stretch here. We're going to take our die set and we are going to bell the mouth of this case in order to accept the bullet. And what all that really means is a fancy way of saying is flaring the lip open just enough for it to accept the bullet. What we're going to do is we're going to use this die. We're going to set it up into the press. We're going to run the ram all the way up, run the die all the way down and back it off a little bit. Again, you know, two of the three dies in our 3-die set are actually designed to do two functions. This particular die has a single function, that is to bell the mouth. I'm going to run the die all the way down until it touches the press, and then I'm going to back it off. And I'm going to back it off like one full turn, okay? And there's no super science behind this. I'm just going to back it off a turn and then lock it down. So really the body now is set. Then we can lower the ram, insert our case, raise the ram, and then we're going to take this black piece here on top and we're going to lower it until I can make the mouth bell the way I want it to. Then you'll lower it. You'll lower it, you'll check and see if the mouth is belled, and then you'll kind of do it all over again. At this point, you want to have one of your bullets handy that you want to load. As you know, I'm doing a Hornady 180 grain hollow point bullet in my lever action, just because I've never done it before and I want to see what a lighter bullet will do. That's kind of what the bullet looks like. I'm going to set the bullet on top. Normally I would do this from the other side of the press, but so it doesn't really sit on there very. Normally what you'll see is once this is properly belled, it'll fall right in place. So let's make this adjustment. We're going to run the ram up. As you can see, the black insert on top, it's actually touching the cartridge right now. So we're going to lower it a little bit, screw it down, set it. I'm going to lock this ring down very lightly, lower this, and then we're going to try this process again. Didn't make very much difference. We're going to raise the ram, lower this insert again, give it another, half turn. And we're going to do a quick little lockdown. This process is a little bit tedious, but it's not bad. It's kind of fun. Very subtle change. We're going to do it again. Raise the ram. And we're going to lower this just a bit. Oh, now you can really feel like it's belling the mouth. There, look at that. See the difference when it's on? The bullet actually just kind of sits in there nice. And you don't want to get crazy. You really want to just bell enough, because whatever you bell, you have to unbell when you crimp it. So to me, that is a good bell. We could take it a little further, but as you're going to see, this is pretty subtle. Right there, you see that slight belling on the mouth or opening of the mouth to accept the bullet. Very subtle, but necessary step, or else you'll shear off copper off the side of the bullet when you seat it. And that's all you really want. So that is belling the case. So now that I've set up the belling die, I am going to just rip through some of this brass bell the case mount. Now what you're seeing me do is I'm starting with, because after I primed, I turned the cases upside down so I could make sure that I had all the cases done. Now that I'm belling, I'm going to leave the case right side up, because the next step after this is going to be charging the case with powder. And what you're gonna want all the brass face up for that. This process, as you can see, goes pretty quick once you get comfortable with not pinching your fingers in the machine. That can be insanely painful. I think we've all done this. All of us reloaders have done this from time to time. And you know, I try to speed up this process in areas that I can, and this is certainly one of those areas that I can. So the next thing you're going to see from me is setting up the powder measure and making sure it's properly zeroed so we can set up our dispenser. I'm going to auto dispense these. I'm not going to do it by hand, but I may show you how to use the trickler again, just so you get it a second time. All right, let me get through these remaining 75 or so cases, and we'll set up a powder measure and powder scale, frankly. Okay, here we are at the powder scale. We're looking at the RCBS. I believe this is called the 505 scale. Pretty simple scale, and essentially I think the reason for that is it reads 505 grains of powder. But so I just set the scale here on my the tan board, and we have to zero the scale. It's a thing that you do every time you move it, every time you touch it, every time you're going to use it. I would just make sure there's no debris or dust, or everything is kind of situated right. I give it kind of just a little wiggle. Make sure everything is kind of happy. And then what I'm talking about, I'm zeroing, is I'm making sure that the beam is zero, the tens are zeroed, and the tenths are zeroed. And this one's not quite, so I'm going to zero it. You saw this on the video for tools, so I'm not going to get too elaborate. Now I'm looking here to make sure that this pointer is pointing right at the zero, and we are, from what I can tell, and it may look a little different on the camera, I'm going to make sure I lower this foot until the beam is actually zeroed. One thing I do like to do is I do like to kind of give a little bit of a check weight, and especially right now my shop is pretty cold. And let's just kind of give it a couple of little check weights. That's what these little guys are. And I believe these are two, I think that's a 20 and a 20. So we're going to take the pan out of here. We're going to put these two little check weights in here, which should equate to 40 grains. I'm going to put them back in there. As you can see, it weighed quite a bit heavier because we haven't balanced it by putting 40 grains on the slider here. And if everything checks out, this should still zero. And it does perfectly. Always nice to see that. Okay, so that is setting up your scale, zeroing it, and then also checking check weights. Now you know, for the longest time I did this without check weights and everything was fine. There was no issues. But I went out and I bought the RCBS check weights, and I've never looked back. I think it's a sound investment. Let's talk for a second about powder pans. And I showed you this once before, but one thing I failed to mention is the difference in materials. Let's see if we can't back the bus up here a little bit so you can see all these well enough. Aluminum, steel, plastic. There's also a brass one. I like the brass one for the reason that it's not really static. It's not conductive, and neither I don't find the aluminum one to be conductive in any way, shape, or form. But the plastic and the steel can be. So if you find that you get powder that like magnetically attracts itself to the pan, then you're going to have to wash it. And when you wash it, you want to make sure as you're washing it, you're kind of grounding it out on something metal, and not let it air dry. Excuse me, let it air dry, to be clear. And make sure you don't dry it with a towel, because then you're charging it again. If you're having problems and you want a quick fix, one thing that you can do is you can use a standard dryer sheet from the dryer at home, and you can wipe out the pan with that. But that's kind of how you want to go about changing the static if you run into that complication. I don't, because primarily I use this tiny little aluminum pan. And you remember that you never want all these pans weigh differently, so you would never, once you've zeroed the scale out, you would never want to change the pan that you use, because things are going to be very, very different. And you'll remember in that other video I showed you the little BBs in the bottom of this tray. You would have to make fairly significant adjustments. And as you can see, the steel one is heavier, the plastic one is lighter than the aluminum. That's probably exactly what you would have guessed. But, and you can see I'm pretty ginger with my scale. Aside from placing the metal one on there, I try to take, this is your lifeblood right here. If you mess this up, it could be catastrophic. So take this part seriously, enter and exit the scale very, very gently, and let the scale do its job. Make sure it's zeroed. Now we're going to set up the powder measure and use the scale that we've just now set up for loading our cases. Alright, so we are ready to set up the powder measure. This powder measure is an ancient Reading powder measure. It is been a great measure for me. If you recall, in my previous videos I talked about having different drums for this measure. And honestly, I might come into that problem here, so we might learn that firsthand, and I might have to go back to my RCBS measure and pull it out. I haven't had to, because I've been loading this with primarily rifle cases, but we're going to see how small of a charge this goes. Fortunately, we're using the H110 powder from Hodgdon to reload these, and you can tend to get a little more powder in the case. So hopefully we don't run into a situation where I have to change out powder measures, but it's entirely possible. So what you saw me do is you saw me pull the lid off. I've set it aside. We want to pour the powder inside the powder measure. And it doesn't hurt to give it a couple of throws just to make sure there's nothing that you missed the last go around in the powder measure itself. We're going to put a little bit of powder in here. As you can see, I'm pouring about 3/4 of the way full. It really doesn't matter. You can fill it up or not. In these early stages, while you're setting this up, you're going to be putting powder back in, fair amount of times. So I wouldn't worry about putting the cap on at this point, because you're just going to be taking it off, putting it back on. The one thing that I do that is a nice trick is that and you really have to do this in some fashion, whether you do it with a rubber band or if you do it with a tape or whatever, or some kind of a label. I write down the actual powder that I'm going to use, and when I settle on a charge, and normally I pick a rubber band that's a little stiffer, but you'll get the point. But when I settle on a charge, I write that on the rubber band too, and it just kind of straps to the side of the measure, and it's always there. This one's going to happen to fall down to the bottom. It's not going to get in my way, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. So then, where you start is really, there's no real rhyme or reason. If you recall from the book that I need to work this load up. And so I am going to go back and do a quick glance at the book for 44 Magnum, 180 grains. Rather, I'm going to look at my notes, and it'll be there as well. And with H110, the starting load is going to be 29 grains. And this is going to be in a pistol, and I'm putting it in a rifle. And I am going to start right at 29 grains, which is the starting load. And we're going to find out what that, just where this thing is set at. This is a micrometer, and again, if you remember, there's a plunger inside here that allows a different, opens up the cavity or shrinks the cavity inside. This is going to lock down said plunger, and then this is going to give you the adjustment to increase or decrease. And this happens to be, there's some graduations on here. I would not even worry about the graduations at this point. All you're going to really be is more or less, and this is going to be a trial and error process. So we're going to see what that trial and error looks like. Remember, if you recall from the previous video, 3 taps or three slaps of the handle. Whatever you do, you want to make sure that you get all the powder out. And even there, I'm shaking a tiny little bit of powder out. So whatever you do, you want to be consistent so you have consistent results. Anytime, and I'm going to adjust this so the cavity is quite a bit smaller. And anytime you make adjustments to this, you really want to throw, frankly, I kind of throw 3, 4, 5 charges just to make sure I've got the thing set right. And again, to be consistent. So let's see what that looks like. The 3 taps, drops a little more powder out. I'm moving to the scale. I want to see how heavy that charges. So now you heard me say 29 grains. So I'm going to move this to the 2. I'm going to move this roller to the 9. Ideally, you would have done this before, but I'm just kind of showing you on camera how that works. It's 28, 29. I'm going to lock it down. I'm going to grab my glasses and make sure I did that right. This is the part where you check twice, and it looks like I've got 29 grains set up on there, and clearly the powder charge is heavier than 29 grains. So I'm going to reduce this cavity again, lock it down. I'm going to throw several charges. When I'm settling this in, I don't really need to tap the side. You really need to do it on the last couple, but we'll try that. See how close we're at now. And measure this powder charge. And I've come up a little bit light, so we're going to go back to the press and open things up a little bit, lock it down. Again, this is trial and error. I'm going to measure again. Getting closer, but no cigar. Gonna open this up some more. It's hard to break old habits. It's better to do it every time than not to do it. What'll happen is if you skip it, that step of tapping the side, you will have one charge heavy and then one charge light. Again, you want consistency in your technique. Look at this, we're getting a whole lot closer. Looks like it's coming a little light, but before I make any changes, I am going to throw another charge with my, well, I don't know, what do you want to call it, standardized technique. And I am going to measure again. This is the measure twice, load once kind of technique. It looks like I'm just a few tenths of a grain. Again, those graduations on the scale are in tenths of a grain. So I'm going to increase this just by a smidgen. And I'm going to go through the whole step again. The 5 throws, tapping on the side. Get that powder dispensed in my pan. Set it up on the scale. I'm going to see how close I got. Frankly, that looks like it is incredibly close. If you recall, your scale is going to be accurate within 1/10 of a grain. And I'm just going to throw a couple of charges here just to make sure our number is good. This H110 measures incredibly well. Boy, it sure comes up right a hair under. And since H110 is one of those powders that could get a little funny if you're too light, I want to make sure that that I'm right on, especially since I'm dealing at the bottom end of the scale. It doesn't like too little and it doesn't like too much. So I'm going to give this a hair more. And again, I'm going through the motions. Alright, so I'm planning on this being the last throw of powder. And my guess is it's just coming up. Looks to me a little bit light still. So I am going to do this one more time. Increase the charge a hair. See if we've come up with 29 grains for my starting load. There you go. It's come up just enough. We're going to lock this down. We're going to pour, you can either pour this in a case or you can pour it right back in the measure. Put your lid on. You're good to go. Keep it dry inside there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to charge some cases, and I'll show you what that looks like real fast. So we are charging cases. I'm going to take my loading tray. Fortunately, with 44 Magnum, these cases are nice and big, and we're going to just really run them down the way, and you're going to be sure that you haven't double charged, and you're going to use a flashlight to look inside as necessary. Also, this gives you an opportunity to look for any debris that you might have missed or anything out of the ordinary. But the more you're handling the cases to a degree, the better off you are. So again, this is going to be the, up down tap tap tap, up down tap tap tap, up down tap tap tap. You're going to put in this piece here on the bottom here. This is actually like a funnel, and so you're going to actually put the piece of brass up inside there like this. You're going to want to make sure that you don't mess this up and spill powder all over the place. I'm going to do 10 of these. I'm already halfway done because this is going to be a load development. And I might go up depending on how these shoot, and I'll show you that. Great. There's 10 charged cases. Let me show you what that looks like. So the nice thing about loading something like a 44 Magnum is if you were to double charge these cases, it would clearly overflow everywhere and you'd make a hell of a mess. So these cases are very easy to spot. The powder is right up to the top. You can use a flashlight to shed some light on things, but it seems very redundant because, you know, I have 10 charged cases and none of them are double charged and they all look like they're at the same height. So from this point, I am going to seat a bullet and crimp a bullet. This is Paul with Reloading123. Thank you again for signing in. And we've got one more video and we are completely done with the whole reloading process. It's coming at you pretty quick. Thanks again, you guys.